So today's lecture, we will cover the introduction to normal and abnormal tissue. Okay. So the learning outcome from this lecture is that at the end of the session or lecture, you should be able to first describe the location, structures, and function of 4 types of primary tissue in human body. Okay, so what is the primary tissue in human body? So that's we are going to learn in this lecture today. And then you should be able to identify human tissues that can be found in different organs. And lastly, to differentiate between the normal and abnormal tissue in terms of its general characteristics, location, and function. So this is the lecture content for today. So I will briefly explain about the cells and cells organization, and you will have introduction to the tissues. And tissues, divided it with the normal tissues and the abnormal tissues, okay? Okay, the first section is the cells. So if you already familiar with this figure, it's actually the hierarchy or the organization of life. That it begins with the molecular parts of the nature, which is the atom. Made different atoms make molecules, and molecules will build up the organelle, and different types of organelle made up the cells. So the cells is actually the basic unit of living things. From the cells, same cells will produce or generate one tissue, and tissue will become different types of organ, and different types of organs made up our system, like respiratory system, pulmonary systems, and then that's made up what we are today, which is the organism or the human. Okay, so the main thing I want to show here is that the cell is actually the basic unit of living things. This is an example of the cilia cells and nasal nerve cells that made up the organism. Please find out what is this actually, okay? So introduction of cells. So like late 1838, Schleiden and Schwann proposed a cell theory. So if you learn in cell biology, or you learn in genetics, or you learn in immunology also about the cells, all living things are made of one or more cells. That is cells theory. And that cells are the basic unit of structure and function in organism, that it plays specific roles or function. So cells are coming from the reproduction of existing cells. So the identical daughter cells doesn't necessarily produce the same types of cells. One daughter cells acquire the expression of a neuron-specific gene during the translation and transcription process. It will later develop into a neuron. And one other daughter cells, when acquire expression of epithelial specific gene, it will develop into the epithelial cell. Even the parent is one single cell, like stem cells, they divided and become different types of cell, but it has a specific function, like neuron in neuron system, like epithelial cells, lining of different organs in our body. Okay, so this is the size of the atom, 0.1 nano. Okay, and then protein, and then we have the viruses, and then we have organelles, bacteria, and the plant and animal cell is actually almost similar in size. Okay, this is just, I want to give you an idea or overview, the sizes, different sizes of component in living organisms. So this is an idealized animal cell, because we are working with animal and human cells. So this is an idealized animal cells. I believe all of you already have an overview what is the animal cell looks like. Okay, very rigid structure and different types of organelle compartmentalized in it. So cells organization, same cells will be later on develop when they are accumulated together. So they will develop the epithelial tissue. That the epithelial tissue will produce an organ, for example, the stomach. And then the stomach also develop our digestive system. Or another example is smooth muscle cells, also will develop into the epithelial tissues. But epithelial tissue have a different kind of epithelial tissue. We will learn after this, columnar, ciliated, coboidal, and then it will also develop into small intestine that also will develop our digestive system. So this is the organization. From the cells, it will develop into the tissues. Tissues made up the organs, and organs make our body system. Okay. So what is the tissue? So study of the tissue is called histology, which involve the microscopic examination of tissue appearance, organization, and function. So this course is histological techniques. It is a techniques to prepare tissue for microscopic examination. Okay. So tissue is a collection of cells which have similar structure and perform relatively common functions. So the primary tissue works together to contribute to overall health and maintenance of our body. So, but any disruptions of the structure also will affect its function and lead to injury or disease, which we call it as an abnormal tissue formation. So that's why in this course we separated and divided between the normal tissue and abnormal tissue for you to know the difference in terms of morphology, structure, and also functions of both a normal and abnormal tissue. So the process of cells growing and dividing, we call it as a cell proliferation. So in normal cells, cells will undergo cell division to become a healthy tissue. Accumulation of the normal cell will become a healthy tissues. Okay, but in abnormal cells, some genetic changes occur when there is a stimulus like from the radioactive, increase the ROS, or maybe exposing to carcinogens, will change the genetic in the normal cell. That the genetic changes will cause the cancerous cell division, and later on will form a malignant tumor. So in malignant tumor, there is uncontrolled cell proliferation. So that's why it becomes a mass of tumor. So that is different between the normal and abnormal tissue. So primary tissue, we have 4 different types of basic primary tissue, which is the epithelium, connective, muscular, and also nervous tissue. Okay, so nervous tissue usually located at the brain, spinal cord, and our nerves system. And muscle tissue comprises of the cardiac muscles that made the lining of our heart, smooth muscles that lining different types of organ, and also the skeletal muscle. And connective tissues is comprises of adipose tissue, bone, and also the tendon. The epithelial tissue, lining of our gastrointestinal tract, and also the skin surface. Okay, so this is all 4 types of basic primary tissue. So let's go to the first type, which is the epithelium. So the epithelium tissue is the most abundant, widespread throughout the body to covers or lining the organs and body surfaces. Epithelial cell usually anchored to a basement membrane, and it is made up of tightly packed cells containing little intercellular material and lack of blood vessel, and also are replaced frequently because they are abundant. Okay, and some part like our gastrointestinal tract, urinary tract, blood vessel, uterus, skin, gland have this epithelium tissue. Okay, so this is the main function of epithelium tissue. They play a role in defense and protect body organ because it made lining of our organs, and it secrete gastric juice in stomach, and it absorb digested food in intestine, and also remove waste as sweat in skin. So this is main role or function of epithelium tissue. Okay, this is what I said. Epithelium tissue have different kind of characteristic. It is divided into a simple epithelium and also stratified, or become strata, or they have a level of more than 1 layer of cells. So we call it as a stratified. So in one cell layer, one epithelium layer, divided into squamous, coboidal, or maybe columnar, and also pseudostratified epithelium. But coboidal and columnar also may have cilia or doesn't have cilia, or maybe they have a stereocilia. And for stratified, multiple layer of epithelium, so they have a squamous, coboidal, columnar, and transitional. And for squamous and coboidal, it is divided keratinized or non-keratinized, the keratin protein in the cells. I will go through one by one here. Simple squamous epithelium. So this is the not illustration, it's actually the real staining of the simple squamous epithelium. So it is mostly aligning in esophagus, blood vessels, and also alveoli in lungs. The structure is a single layer of thin and flattened cells with a disc-shaped central nuclei and sparse cytoplasm. So if it is easy to differentiate squamous epithelium with other cells because it has a very distinct shape and the nucleus is central. Some cells, you will find the nucleus is at the lining of the plasma membrane. But for epithelium cells, the nuclei is actually at the center. So the function of squamous epithelium is to protect the underlying tissue from injury and also germs, and also to control diffusion and filtration process. Okay. So next is simple coboidal epithelium. As the name already represent the shape of coboidal of simple epithelium. Okay, you can see a cuboidal shape here. The nuclei also in the center, and it usually have underlying membrane here, which appear in blue line. Here you can see, or also you can see here, the basal membrane is usually stained with blue. Okay, so it provides mechanical support and also secreting substance in glands. So that one, we will call it as a glandular epithelium. Okay, pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. So this epithelium cell has a columnar shape with a cilia. Here you can see a hairy-like structure, which is the cilia. So cilia usually form as the lining of the trachea or upper respiratory tract. Okay, it's also a single layer of cell that give appearance that we can see it is in multiple layer. But it's actually only one layer, but it's pseudo. Pseudo means like fake, not the actual stratified, but the single layer make the appearance looks like a multiple layer. So the function of this type of epithelium to help in absorption, excretion, and secretions. Okay, and also the pseudostratified columnar ciliated epithelium, it's almost same like this one. Okay, but this one is a lining of a bronchus. And the next one is non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. So usually located at the lining of oral cavity, eyes conjunctiva, part of pharynx, esophagus, vagina, and anus. And it is multiple layers of cells, and basal cells are typically cuboidal or polyhedral, and they have a visible nuclei. So this type of squamous epithelium is non-keratinized. You cannot see a keratin protein in the structure. So the function is to protect underlying tissue in areas subjected to abrasion and prevent them from drying out. Okay, so this is the keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. So it usually made up the epidermis of the skin, hairs, and nail. So it has a multiple layers of cells, and basal cells are typically also cuboid and columnar. But the difference between non-keratinized and keratinized, that you can see a keratin protein in it. So it functions to protect and prevent dehydration. Okay. And next is stratified cuboidal epithelium. So it made up the lining of the larger excretory duct of exocrine glands, such as the salivary gland, sweat gland, and also mammary gland. Okay, so the structure, it has a typically 2 layers of cuboidal cells. So this is one layer, and this is layer number 2. So it provides a robust lining in mainly a glands. And transitional epithelium, a type of stratified epithelium. It made the lining of urinary bladder, so it resembled both stratified squamous and also coboidal. Okay, stratified, it is actually made a strata, a level, 1 level, 2 level, 3 level. You can see the level by looking at their nucleus. Okay, this is 1 level, 2 level. So it made up multi-layer of squamous and also in a shape of cuboid. So the function is stretching and allows store urine to distend urinary organ. So it helps in, it has the stretching function. Okay, now let's move on to the connective tissue. Okay, so the function is to provide support to transport material from one part of the body to another, and it also play function in defense mechanism, or it provide protection to the tissue and store energy and also insulation. So the components, there are three main components, which is the cells, fibers, and ground substance. So fibers usually comprises of collagen, reticular, and elastic fibers. And the cells, usually we have fibroblasts, adipocyte, the fat cells, the mast cells, macrophages, lymphocytes, plasma cells. Okay, so let's go one by one. Okay, loose areolar connective tissue. It made up most part of the body, and as you can see here, the structure, it has a fibrous nuclei in it, very scattered and well distributed, and it also have fibers of collagen here, and very thin like hairy structure is actually the elastic fiber. Okay, so it functions to provide elasticity and tensile strength, to connect and support other tissue, for example, under the skin, between muscles, supporting blood vessels and nerve, and also in alimentary canal. Adipose tissue, it is located deep to the skin, especially at sides, buttock and breast, and padding around eyes and kidneys. Okay, so the adipose tissue is actually divided into white adipose tissue and brown adipose tissue, but most commonly we found is white adipose tissue. This is, for example, so this is the nucleus here. This is N is the nucleus, C is the capillary. So you can see the nucleus is already pushed to one side. Okay. So it provides padding and cushion shock, insulate to reduce heat loss, and also stores energy. And reticular tissue, it's located mainly in the liver, kidney, spleen. So it made the lymph node and bone marrow as well. So it has a semi-solid matrix because it contains the reticulin fiber. Okay, so it provides the supporting framework. And next is the dense connective tissue. So we can divide it, dense connective tissue, two main types, the regular and also this is actually the irregular. So the regular is found in the ligaments that link bones to another bone by joint, and also you can find it in the tendon, connection between bones or cartilage and muscles. And dense regular connective tissue is composed of type 1 collagen fibers. So collagen fibers have different types. In dense regular connective tissue, it is actually the type 1 collagen fibers that you can see oriented in the same direction here. So it functions to powerfully resistant to axial loaded tension force, but allow some stretch. And the irregular connective tissue is found in joint capsule in the connective tissue that envelop the muscle. Okay, and it form also the mist of skins. So the structure, irregular, contain also the type 1 collagen fibers woven in multiple direction. So for regular, it's actually in the same direction, but collagen fibers here have different multiple directions, like accumulated. Okay, and it is impact resistant. Okay, elastic fiber made up large blood vessel wall, also lining the trachea and bronchi and the lung. Okay, there are few cells, and the matrix consists mainly of masses and also elastic fibers secreted by fibroblasts. So you can see here the elastic This is a type of elastic fibers. If we observe under microscope, this kind of tissue, we can see very clearly. Okay, so very intensive, the elastic fibers. So it provides the elasticity, can be stretched, and yet still turning to original length. And next is the bone. Okay, bone, the location is throughout the body, so we know where our bone is. So the long bone is covered by vascular membrane or periosteum. The outer layer is fibrous. The inner layer is osteogenic, containing osteoblasts, which is the bone forming cells. And the central cavity filled with bone marrow cells, bone marrow which made our blood. And also the Haversian canal is tubular-like structure, also containing the blood vessels. And there are two types of bone, which is the spongy and also the compact bone. So bone support the body structure, and it protect our vital organs and allow body movement. Okay. And blood, so we know it is a fluid connective tissue. It runs through veins, arteries, and capillary in our body. So it is made of several components, including red blood cells, white blood cells, platelet, the plasma, which contains also coagulation factors and serums. Okay, so this is an example of the illustration where you can see lymphocyte, the white blood cells type, the neutrophil, monocyte, eosinophil, basophil, accumulated together with the other red blood cells, and also we can see a platelet here. Okay, so this is the components of blood actually. So what blood do is that it regulates the body pH, temperature, control the osmotic pressure, circulation of nutrients and removal of waste, distribution of hormones, and eliminating excess heat. It also contains components for body clothing. Okay. So this is just the next 5 or 6 figure is just example of tissue, stained tissue. Wants to show you the epithelium and connective tissue together. So this is a signa epithelium. Okay, the neighboring cell is actually the connective tissue. And this is example of stratified squamous epithelium with non-keratinized. And we can see clearly there is no protein keratin here. Okay. And this is also example of connective tissue with neighboring the epithelium. So this is what types of epithelium with the cuboidal shape and made the lining the duct shape. And this is the epidermis, the stratified squamous epithelium. So this is one level, the multi-layer of epithelium, together with the fibrous connective tissue. And we can see here also the capillary and venule. And this is also a pseudostratified columnar epithelium. And we can see cilia. This must be a lining of respiratory tract. And also we can see a blood vessel here and the connective tissue. Okay, so let's jump to the third type of primary tissue, which is the muscular. Okay, muscular tissue made up of muscle cells, which form muscle fiber and unite to form a muscle tissue. So it can contract and relax dynamically, and it functions in locomotion or movement. So skeletal muscle pull on the bone, causing movement at the joint. Okay, so it also provides support and protection, heat generation, and also blood circulation. There are three classes of muscular tissue, which is the skeletal, cardiac, it's actually a smooth muscle. Okay, the first one is smooth muscle cells. It's a wall of hollow organ, including stomach, intestine, bladder, and uterus. They also made up the wall of passageway, for example, the blood and lymph vessel, and they can found in the tract of respiratory, urinary, and reproductive system. It has a fibrous arrangement in highly regulated manner, and it is packed so tightly that we hardly see the nucleus. Here is the nucleus, but because it tightly packed, so we cannot see very clearly the nucleus. Cells are short, spindle-shaped, and non-striated with a single and central nucleus. But if we can have a better resolution, we can see that the nucleus is actually a central nucleus. Okay, so it controls the diameter, wall movement, and wall stiffness of hollow organs like the vascular, bronchial, gastrointestinal, or urogenital system, as well as the uterus. Okay, next is skeletal muscle. So it made up the bicep brachii and gluteus maximus, and it is found in the eyes, throat, diaphragm, and also the anus. And the structure is actually long and cylindrical. You can see it is striated and multinucleated. Here is the nucleus. You can see. So this is the nucleus, and it functions in the locomotion and stabilize the position of the skeleton. So the cardiac muscle made up the wall of our heart. So it is a short cells. Here, short cells. It is divided or interconnected by intercalated disc. So this is intercalated disc, and it has single but elongated nucleus. So it functions in to circulate the blood and also maintain the blood pressure. Okay, the last one is the nervous. Nervous tissue is actually a type of primary tissue. So it found in nervous system. There are two types. Excitable cells, we call it as a neuron. Non-excitable cells, we call it as a glia or neuroglia. Okay, it functions in irritability, the capacity to react to various physical and chemical agents. And conductivity, the ability to transmit resulting reaction from one point to another point. Is actually transmission or communication between the neurons. Okay, so neurons is important in neural communication. So it provides the most unique function of the nervous system. Okay, so let's say, for example, for sensing, thinking, remembering, controlling muscle activity, and regulation glandular secretion, all of these, it is facilitated by the action of the neuron, the communication between the neurons. Okay, so neuroglia provide support, nourish and protect the neurons, and maintain homeostasis in the interstitial fluid that bath the neuron. So the excitable cell that involved in neural communication is actually the neuron. Okay, so this is the neuron. You can see it has the dendrite, a long dendrite. I couldn't find a very clear picture, but I think you can have an overview here. So it contains the nucleus, and we can see clearly the nucleolus in the nucleus. So this is a long dendrite. Okay, so the neuron has three main parts: the cell body, here, the cell body, and the branching that we call it as a dendrite. And also we have a small branching or projection, we call it as an axon. So you cannot see very clearly here. Maybe I can find a very good picture later. The axon that made up the small branches. Okay. So it receives, process, and transmit information through electrical and chemical signals, like for neuron communication. Okay, this is the neuroglia. Example of abundant neuroglia in the nervous system is actually the astrocytes. So it is a star-shaped neuroglia, almost look like a star, and numerous in our central nervous system. So it forms the support structure for nervous tissue, insulating and protecting the neurons. Okay. Okay. So we still have time. Maybe we can continue to learn about the abnormal tissue. So usually we continue with this in the second lecture. But the second lecture, I want to focus on the tissue system. So let's just finish about the tissue types this week, okay? So the abnormal tissue. So you have to know about the terms neoplasia or the tumors. So neoplasia is actually abnormal growth, mass of tissue, which exceed what is coordinated in the normal tissue, okay? And characteristic, it occurs because of the genetic changes, could be a mutation that occur, and it is autonomous, uncontrolled replication and proliferation. So in normal cell have a very balanced replication and also cell death. But in the abnormal tissue, the replication and proliferation is too high. It's become uncontrollable, so the tissue become a mess, okay, a tumor. So it is clonal, derived from same cells and carry the same genetic, but it's just that it has uncontrollable replication. Okay, there are two types, benign and malignant tumor. The malignant tumor is more potent, so it has ability to invade other tissue or other organ by metastasis process. Okay, and classification, tumor are classified according to the embryonic origin of the tissue from which they originate. Like for example, carcinoma is used to denote the cancer that derive from endodermal or ectodermal, and mesodermal from the muscle or blood, we call it as a sarcoma. So the normal cell have a small uniformly shaped nuclei and relatively large cytoplasmic volume. Okay, so when you observe the tissue under microscope, you know that you're using the normal tissue, but you can differentiate different types of cells by looking at the nucleus. Okay, so how you differentiate which cell is which, or maybe it is or protein, keratin protein, or what? You can look at the nucleus. Okay, once you have nucleus, it's already a cell. Okay, protein, keratin, it is not a cell, it's protein. Okay, but the cancerous cell or tumor has a large variable shaped nuclei. The shape is not uniform. Sometimes it becomes clumping, and it has a relatively small cytoplasmic volume because the shape of nucleus is too big that it take the space of cytoplasm. So conformity in cell size and shape, cells arranged in discrete tissue, but for abnormal cells, the cell is disorganized. You will see this picture here, it is not organized. We cannot differentiate between coboidal epithelium or simple pseudostratified epithelium. It's very difficult because it is not organized, and may possess differentiated cell structure, normal presentation of cell surface marker, loss of specialized features, elevated expression of certain cell markers. Markers mean different phenotypes, different structure than normal cells. So look at here, the cells have a branching. It could be they develop something because of the genetic changes in it. Okay, become different in shape, not the normal cells that it used to be. Lower levels of dividing cells tissue are clearly demarcated. I will show you how to observe the slides with dividing cells. We can see that the cells is actually dividing when we fixing the cells. Large number of dividing cells, poorly defined tumor boundaries. No boundaries, the plasma membrane is already broken, so there's no more single cells. Okay, as we can see, different single cells, and we can differentiate. It's actually a normal cells. But in the cancerous or tumor, there is no boundary. The plasma is already broken. There's a disorganized shape, and so many. If I zoom it here, we can see multiple nucleus located in it because it is already cancerous or tumor. Okay. So the benign tumor, when you see the nomenclature, it belongs to the benign neoplasm. Mesenchymal tumor, for example, the chondroma, the cartilaginous tumor, fibroma is fibrous tumor, osteoma is a bone tumor. And epithelial tumor, which derive from the epithelial cells, is adenoma, that forming the glands because it is located in the glands. Papilloma, papillary cystadenoma, and polyp. And for malignant tumors, usually found sarcomas derived from mesenchymal cell. We call it as a chondrosarcoma, fibrosarcoma, or osteosarcoma. And osteosarcoma is actually derived from the osteoma. So it is benign initially, but it is uncontrolled that it become the malignant, become the osteosarcoma. And carcinomas actually derived from the epithelial. which is the adenocarcinoma and squamous cell carcinoma. Okay, this is an example of hepatocellular carcinoma. You can see tumor anaplastic cell. Anaplastic means not uniformly in shape, already have changes in shape and size of the normal cells, and tumor giant cells, and it is not organized as normal cells as it used to be. And renal cell carcinoma, also you can see here, one cell have a very big nucleus and multiple nucleus also. An invasive ductal carcinoma, so you can see it is highly proliferated here. The nucleus is so high in ratio to the cytoplasmic, and also you can find this is the keratinized that form. Okay. So same here. This is an example of lung adenocarcinoma. This is actually the cells, but it is disorganized. Okay, so the term anaplasia is actually pleomorphism, the variability in size and shape. It is not regular as normal tissue. And abnormal nucleomorphology usually involve the hyperchromatic, the nucleus that looks darker than normal. Here, you can see when we stain the tumor tissue, we can see that the nucleus is very darker because it's big, so it consumes the stain stronger. So high nuclear cytoplasmic ratio, increased number of nuclei. So the abnormal tissue have an increased number of nucleus. One cell may have 2 or 3 or 4 multiple of nucleus, okay? Because it is not normal. Normal cell only have 1 nucleus. And chromatin clumping, and also prominent nucleoli. When the nucleus is big, sometimes you can observe the nucleolus in it, okay? And mitotic rate, the number of cells dividing in a certain amount of cancer tissue is counted, and also the location of mitosis. So when you learn about, in other subject, you learn about the mitosis, about the cell division. So you can see when you observe the slide, some cells are in dividing phase. So you can see here, cell is dividing into 2. Okay, so this is example. So when I zoom it here, you can see the mitosis phases. So this is maybe the anaphase that cells is dividing into 2. So this is just an example. So when you can see the slide on left, it is moderately differentiated squamous cell carcinoma. So we cannot see the squamous shape because it is moderately differentiated. So this is the highly differentiated. So there is an area of cells with malignant squamous cells, and you can see the pleomorphism, the variability of cell and shape, and hyperchromatism, and high nuclear to cytoplasmic ratio. This is actually the very dense nuclear as compared to the cytoplasmic area in each cells. Okay. And there is a keratin formation here, but it is still slightly. But if you look at the slide on the right, this also the poorly differentiated squamous cell carcinoma with pleomorphic cells, different cell shape and size, and also minimal pink keratinized protein here, which is not cells. Okay, and increased mitotic activity and prominent nuclei. And as you can see here, this is one cell, but this is one cell and it contains like 1, 2 nucleus. Okay, so normal cell only have 1 nucleus. And you have to also understand about dysplasia, which means the abnormal growth, the presence of abnormal cells within the tissue or organ. It's sometimes cancer, but it's sometimes not. Dysplasia is not cancer, but it may sometimes become cancer. It can be mild, moderate, or severe, depending on how abnormal cells look under a microscope and how much of the tissue or organ is affected. And malignant transformation is, it is a multi-step process, right? In order for the cells to become cancer, it needs a multiple steps process before the cell have the ability to become malignant and metastasize to other cells or organ. Okay, Dysplasia, some but not all the features of malignancy are present. So dysplasia may develop into malignancy, for example, in uterine cervix or colon polyps. And it is graded as low grade or high grade. If you look at some diagnosis, low grade of cancer X, high grade of cancer X, it's actually in terms of diagnosis based on dysplasia. So this is a normal cells. It becomes sometimes the hypoplasia, the low grade, and dysplasia. And by time, it does not necessarily become cancer, but it can become cancer eventually. Okay. So this is an example of normal cell which have abnormal cell growth. So this is an example of normal cells with disorganized cells in the tissue. So it is an example of dysplasia. Okay, that's all. So learning outcome today. I hope you already have a brief overview of the 4 types of primary tissue in our body. And you should be able to differentiate its location, structure, and functions. Number 2, I hope you should be able to identify human tissues that can be found in different organs. So stomach have what kind of tissue, what lines the glands in our body. And also you should be able between the normal and abnormal tissue. Okay, that's all for today. Do you have any questions?